You've been living a lie. That exhaustion you feel after socializing isn't weakness or anxiety. It's evidence of how society has gaslit you into seeing your natural introversion as a problem to fix. But what if I told you Carl Jung, one of history's greatest psychologists, discovered that your introversion isn't something to overcome. It's your greatest untapped power source. Every time you've been told to speak up more or come out of your shell, you've been pushed to betray your authentic self. The quiet moments you crave aren't character flaws, they're essential psychological nutrition. Jung knew this truth decades ago, yet modern society continues to sell you the extrovert ideal. Why? Because your introversion threatens a system built on constant social performance, consumption, and external validation. The secret life of the introvert, rich with depth, insight, and untapped potential, represents everything our shallow, noise-addicted culture fears. And it's time you knew the truth. Carl Jung didn't just theorize about introversion, he lived it. As an intensely private man who spent hours in solitude exploring the depths of his own psyche, Jung embodied the introvert experience. In 1921, he introduced the concepts of introversion and extroversion in his groundbreaking work, Psychological Types, distinguishing between these fundamental orientations of human consciousness. But Jung's understanding of introversion bears little resemblance to today's superficial concept of shy people who don't like parties. For Jung, introversion wasn't a social deficiency, it was a different relationship with psychic energy itself. While extroverts direct energy outward toward people and objects in the external world, introverts direct energy inward toward concepts, ideas, and internal experience. This fundamental discovery revolutionizes how we understand human psychology. Yet somehow, a century later, we've lost this profound insight and replaced it with the damaging myth that introversion is a condition to be fixed rather than a powerful orientation to be harnessed. What secrets about your own nature have you been hiding by conforming to an extroverted ideal? Let's discover what Jung really knew about the secret life of introverts and how this knowledge might transform your understanding of yourself. Jung's conceptualization of introversion runs far deeper than modern pop psychology would have you believe. He didn't see introversion as a point on a spectrum or a set of behaviors. He understood it as a fundamental orientation of consciousness itself, a different relationship with reality. When Jung wrote that introverts focus on the subjective world, he wasn't describing social awkwardness. He was identifying a profound truth. Introverts experience reality primarily through internal reflection rather than external action. Your tendency to think before speaking, to observe before engaging, to process deeply rather than widely. These aren't social inadequacies. They're expressions of a consciousness oriented toward depth rather than breadth. Modern neuroscience confirms what Jung intuited. Research by Dr. Deborah Johnson at the Amen Clinics found that introverts have more blood flow to brain regions involved in internal experiences like remembering, planning, and problem-solving. Meanwhile, extroverts show more activity in areas processing sensory data from the external world. Your brain is literally wired differently. So, when you feel overwhelmed in stimulating environments, it's not because you're defective. Your brain is processing more information, more deeply. When you need to recharge after socializing, it's not because you're antisocial. Your neural pathways are calibrated for different stimulation thresholds. What Jung called psychic energy, neuroscientists now recognize as differences in dopamine sensitivity, sensory processing pathways, and activity in the prefrontal cortex. The internal richness you experience isn't imagination, it's your neurological reality. But let me ask you, how many times have you apologized for these natural tendencies? How often have you pushed yourself to perform extroversion at the cost of your mental health? The price of this performance isn't just fatigue. It's a profound disconnection from your authentic self. Jung wrote, "Who looks outside, dreams. Who looks inside, awakes." Yet our culture persistently values external orientation over internal depth. From open-plan offices to group projects to participation grades in school, society systematically privileges extroversion while pathologizing introversion. This isn't random. A culture built on consumption needs extroverted values, immediate gratification, external focus, and constant social comparison drive consumer behavior. Your introversion is threatening precisely because it values reflection over reaction, depth over novelty, and meaning over stimulation. Your natural tendency toward inner richness is revolutionary in a culture selling endless distraction. Did you know Jung himself was considered strange and reclusive by his contemporaries? He spent years in near isolation at his tower in Bollingen, Switzerland, where he did his most profound work without electricity or running water. What society might label as antisocial behavior produced some of the most influential psychological insights in history. The hidden strengths of introversion remain largely invisible in a world fixated on external achievement. Yet these strengths, the ones Jung identified and modern psychology confirms, represent untapped potential for both personal fulfillment and societal contribution. First among these strengths is the capacity for sustained, deep focus. While extroverts excel at breadth and quick adaptation, your introvert mind naturally drills down, examining multiple layers of meaning, seeing patterns and connections others miss. This isn't just a personality quirk, it's a cognitive superpower. The ability to maintain attention despite distraction, to work through complex problems methodically, to analyze rather than react. These capabilities drive innovation and discovery. Consider these secret introverts whose deep processing changed the world. Albert Einstein, whose thought experiments revolutionized physics. Rosa Parks, whose quiet determination launched a movement. Bill Gates, whose analytical mind built an empire. J.K. Rowling, who created worlds within before bringing them without. Their introversion wasn't incidental to their achievement. It was foundational. The second hidden strength lies in your heightened sensitivity to subtlety. The same neural wiring that makes crowded spaces overwhelming also makes you exceptionally attuned to nuance, underlying emotions, and unspoken dynamics. You notice what others miss, not because you're anxious, but because your perceptual filters process more information more thoroughly. Jung called this the introverted intuitive function, the ability to perceive unconscious content and connect seemingly unrelated insights into coherent visions. This isn't mystical. It's the natural result of a cognitive system that prioritizes depth over breadth, signal over noise. When was the last time you trusted your deep knowledge over someone else's confident but shallow assertion? Your intuitive understanding isn't just a feeling. It's your neural network's processing data below conscious awareness, incorporating subtle patterns others miss entirely. The third strength Jung identified was your privileged access to what he called the collective unconscious, the deepest layer of the psyche containing universal human patterns and archetypes. While extroverts excel at navigating the collective conscious, the shared social reality, introverts more naturally connect with deeper currents of meaning and symbolism. This connection explains why introverts are disproportionately represented among artists, writers, philosophers, and scientists, making fundamental rather than incremental contributions. Your natural inward orientation positions you closer to the wellspring of creative insight that Jung believed resided in the unconscious mind. Think of consciousness as an ocean. Extroverts skillfully navigate the surface, the waves, currents, and weather of daily social reality. But as an introvert, you're a natural deep-sea diver, more comfortable exploring the hidden depths where pressure is higher but treasures abound. Both orientations have value, but our culture has forgotten the worth of deep diving. The fourth strength is your self-sufficient nature. While the extrovert draws energy from external validation and social feedback, you possess the capacity to evaluate, motivate, and sustain yourself through internal resources. Jung saw this as a profound strength, the ability to maintain psychological equilibrium independent of external conditions. In a world of increasing uncertainty, this internal stability represents an undervalued asset. When external systems fail, when social validation disappears, when popularity proves hollow, the internally anchored introvert often demonstrates remarkable resilience. Society calls this independence when celebrating entrepreneurs or leaders who hold unpopular positions, but it pathologizes the same quality as a social withdrawal when manifested in everyday life. This double standard reveals how threatening authentic introversion remains to collective norms. The psychological cost of denying your introvert nature extends far beyond occasional discomfort. Jung's concept of the shadow, the repressed, denied aspects of the self, applies directly to how many introverts relate to their own nature. When you constantly perform extroversion, your authentic introvert self doesn't disappear. It gets pushed into shadow, emerging as depression, anxiety, chronic fatigue, or mysterious physical symptoms. Jung would recognize what modern psychology calls social burnout as the predictable consequence of violating your psychological type. When you consistently override your natural energy management system, psychological exhaustion isn't a possibility. It's an inevitability. The concept Jung called individuation, the process of becoming your whole, authentic self, requires integrating rather than rejecting your introversion. This doesn't mean avoiding all social interaction or dismissing external reality. It means honoring your natural orientation while developing the flexibility to engage differently when necessary. Ask yourself honestly, how much of your self-criticism stems from measuring yourself against an extroverted ideal that was never designed for minds like yours? What would change if you stopped apologizing for your natural rhythm and started designing your life around it instead? Jung believed that psychological wholeness required integrating the conscious and unconscious, honoring both the persona, social self, and the authentic self behind it. For introverts living in an extroverted culture, this integration presents a unique challenge: how to maintain authentic connection to your internal landscape while functioning in a world that systematically devalues it. The path forward isn't rejecting the external world entirely. Jung himself warned against becoming lost in subjective fantasies through excessive introversion. Rather, the goal is conscious integration, recognizing your introvert orientation as a strength to be leveraged rather than a liability to be hidden. Imagine your introversion not as a wall separating you from others, but as a well-supplying depth that enriches every interaction. The question isn't whether to engage with the external world, but how to do so without draining your internal reservoir dry. Practical strategies for honoring your introvert needs while engaging effectively begin with environmental design. Jung created Bollingen Tower as a physical manifestation of his introvert needs, a space entirely his own, designed for reflection rather than performance. What spaces have you created that serve your authentic nature rather than societal expectations? Time management likewise requires introvert-specific approaches, where extroverts may thrive with fragmented attention across multiple social contexts. Your cognitive architecture likely requires longer periods of uninterrupted focus followed by true restoration, not just the absence of social obligation, but the presence of meaningful solitude. Consider two different weekend plans. The extrovert ideal, a packed social calendar with multiple events, constant interaction, and minimal downtime. The introvert necessity, intentional alternation between selective engagement and restorative solitude with buffer time for integration, which more honestly reflects your needs. Communication style represents another area where introvert strength gets misinterpreted as weakness. Your tendency toward depth over breadth, reflection before response, and careful word choice isn't inefficiency. It's quality control. Jung noted that introverts typically have fewer but deeper relationships precisely because their communication style values substantive exchange over social volume. Society celebrates the charismatic speaker commanding attention in a crowded room, but equal appreciation should go to the thoughtful respondent who, having processed deeply, offers the insight that changes everything. Both contribute, but our culture only consistently values one. Professional contexts present perhaps the greatest challenge to introvert authenticity. Corporate cultures frequently reward visibility over value, assertion over analysis, and confidence over competence. Yet research consistently shows that introverted leaders often produce better long-term outcomes, particularly with proactive teams, precisely because they listen more and talk less. A famous study by Adam Grant at Wharton found that introverted leaders produced 20% higher profits when leading proactive employees. Why? Because they create space for others' contributions rather than dominating the conversation with their own ideas. The pathway Jung called individuation, becoming your whole, integrated self, requires reclaiming your introvert power from societal devaluation. This isn't self-indulgence, it's psychological necessity. By honoring your natural orientation, You access creativity, insight, and resilience unavailable through performance and pretense. What would your life look like if you stopped apologizing for your introversion and started leveraging it instead? What depth of thought, creative output, or relational intimacy might become possible if you designed your days around your authentic rhythm rather than an extroverted ideal? Jung wrote, "Your vision will become clear only when you can look into your own heart. Who looks outside dreams. Who looks inside awakes." This awakening to your true nature, your authentic needs, and your unique contributions represents the heart of Jung's message to introverts. The greatest tragedy of the introvert's secret life is that its richness remains hidden not just from society, but often from the introvert themselves. You've been gaslit so effectively about your own nature that you may have stopped trusting the very inner voice that constitutes your greatest strength. This isn't just about personality preference. It's about reclaiming your psychological sovereignty. Jung believed that betraying your authentic type wasn't just uncomfortable. It was spiritually damaging, cutting you off from your own wellspring of meaning, creativity, and purpose. The modern mental health crisis, with epidemic levels of anxiety, depression, and burnout, can be partially understood as the predictable result of sustained psychological dissonance. When a culture systematically privileges extroversion, while roughly half the population is naturally introverted, psychological suffering isn't an anomaly, it's a structural inevitability. But Jung's message wasn't fatalism, it was liberation through self-knowledge. He wrote that the privilege of a lifetime is to become who you truly are. For the introvert, this becoming requires radical self-acceptance and the courage to honor your nature even when it contradicts cultural norms. Imagine a life where you no longer apologize for needing solitude, for processing deeply, for choosing quality over quantity in relationships and experiences. Imagine designing your environment, schedule, and commitments around your authentic energy management rather than an external ideal. Imagine accessing the full power of your introvert mind without the constant drain of pretending to be someone you're not. This isn't selfish, it's sustainable. Just as an ecosystem requires both sun-loving and shade-dwelling plants, human society needs both extroverted and introverted orientations to function optimally. Your introversion isn't just legitimate, it's necessary. The depth, perspective, and careful analysis you naturally provide counterbalance the breadth, action, and rapid adaptation extroverts contribute. The real secret of introversion isn't weakness masked as strength. It's strength that has been systematically mislabeled as weakness. The very qualities society dismisses, your need for solitude, your deep processing, your careful observation before action, are precisely what enable your unique contributions. Carl Jung didn't just understand introversion, he championed it as a vital psychological orientation with irreplaceable value. In reclaiming this Jungian perspective, you reclaim not just your energy, but your authority to define success, contribution, and fulfillment on terms authentic to your nature. Your introversion isn't something to overcome. It's something to embody more fully and consciously. The path forward isn't becoming more extroverted. It's becoming more authentically, powerfully introverted. This means establishing unapologetic boundaries around your energy. It means creating environments that support deep work rather than constant collaboration. It means choosing relationships that honor your rhythm rather than depleting it. And it means recognizing when performance has replaced authenticity in your professional and personal life. Jung believed that psychological freedom comes from conscious choice rather than unconscious compulsion. You can choose extroverted behaviors when strategically valuable, but from a place of agency rather than conformity, deployed tactically rather than desperately. The secret life of the introvert need not remain secret. By understanding the neurological, psychological, and philosophical dimensions of your introversion, you transform what society labels as liability into your greatest asset. The depth of thought, richness of perception, and independence of spirit Jung, associated with healthy introversion, become sources of power rather than shame. Society needs what introverts naturally provide: the counterbalance to impulsivity, the depth beyond superficiality, the reflection that tempers reaction. Your introversion isn't just good for you, it's essential for a world drowning in noise, distraction, and shallow thinking. So stop apologizing for who you are. Stop performing extroversion at the cost of your authentic self. Stop believing the cultural gaslighting that has convinced you your natural orientation is somehow deficient. Carl Jung's revolutionary insight wasn't just that introverts exist. It was that introversion represents a valid, valuable, and vital orientation to reality itself. In reclaiming this truth, you reclaim not just your energy, but your birthright to exist authentically in a world that desperately needs what only an awakened introvert can provide. The question isn't whether you're introverted enough or extroverted enough. The question is whether you're authentic enough, whether you're living in alignment with your true nature, rather than in reaction to external expectations. Jung wrote that, "The world will ask you who you are, and if you don't know, the world will tell you." Today, choose to answer that question for yourself, not as society has taught you to answer, but as your authentic introvert self knows to be true. The secret life of the introvert is waiting, not to be exposed, but to be lived.